first of all, the salary has to be put in the context of productivity. U.S. workers are very productive. When you give them the capital, when you give them the investment, these factories are very productive. So, and as far as the higher salaries are concerned, the way the Chinese make money is they sell. I hate to be vulgar, but they sell crap. I mean, they sell stuff that falls apart before you open the clamshell box. When you factor in transportation costs, energy costs, the salary differential is not as great as it once was. I'm not talking if it's $15, $20 an hour, maybe $40 an hour in certain industries, that's a globally competitive rate. The people who are not competitive today are the Germans. We can talk about that, but for other reasons. And there are only a handful of countries that really have that kind of manufacturing capability. But you lower your distribution costs, you lower your transportation costs, you're going to lower your energy costs because drill, baby, drill. And U.S. labor is productive. So the notion that you got to pay, it's not like China's auto workers are making $2 an hour and our auto workers are making $40 an hour. I mean, something like that, not quite as extreme, might have been true in the early 80s. It's not true today. I mean, Liam's working in a world of theory, but all these theories are badly flawed. And again, I go back to the fact that this whole tariff scheme that I just outlined was how the United States operated from 1790 onward. This is the myth of free trade. Even David Ricardo knew that free trade, there was no such thing. The problem with free trade is I had a really high grade point average in college, but I struggled a little bit with economics, and I always wonder why. I was like, was I just not bright enough, And it was only later that I realized everything I was taught was garbage. The reason I didn't get it was because it was all wrong. So one of the myths is free trade. So what they teach you is, England is very good at shearing wool and textiles, and Portugal is very good at growing grapes and making wine. It makes no sense to grow grapes in England. It makes no sense to start a textile industry in Portugal. So why doesn't England make the textiles, Portugal make the wine, and just trade? Everybody's doing what they do best, and that's the theory of free trade. You can write those equations. It's pretty simple. That's a completely abstract, artificial construct. So what does the real world look like? The idea is called comparative advantage, what I just described. The idea is like Tom Brady shouldn't mow his own lawn. He could probably mow his lawn better than any landscaper in town, but it's not the thing he does best. He should be, in the broadcast booth now and let the landscaper mow the lawn. It's better for everybody. That's comparative advantage. The problem is, and Ricardo actually recognized this, he said that the factors of production were static in that example, but in the real world, the factors of production are not static. They're completely portable. So who's the most sophisticated, largest, best semiconductor producer in the world today? It's Taiwan Semiconductor in Taiwan. Okay. That industry started in the late 1970s. What was Taiwan's comparative advantage in semiconductors in 1979? Zero. Their comparative advantage was tuna fish and rice. So they created it. They created it out of thin air. They said, we're going to do this. They started with state sponsorship, but they grew out of that very quickly. The companies went public. They were very relaxed about, if you were the hot programmer, developer in Taiwan Semiconductor and you wanted to spin out and start your own company, they would say, yeah, I'll give you the money, I'll give you the capital, create a network of those firms. Maybe people were studying in Stanford or MIT, but they got back to Taiwan. But that's the problem in China. They send their scholars abroad and they don't all come back, but in Taiwan, in many cases, they did, and now they're the leading semiconductor producer in the world. My point is they created the comparative advantage. Now, same problem with China, and there was a time, it's not as true today, but the labor was cheaper, so that was a comparative advantage, but the capital is completely portable. So you take the cheap labor that's there, and the capital, which is portable, which went to China. Now they basically created comparative advantage out of thin air. So the idea that it's natural and static is false. And then you get into, we're talking about U.S. tariffs. Well, guess what? As you know, the rest of the world has very high tariffs on all of our stuff. And then, the other factors are energy, which tends to be a world price. Yes, you do hear that argument, but let me just,
Okay.
I'll come back to that point, but let me just separate them for a second. If China's annoyed or miffed or upset or whatever, who cares? I mean, that's not our job. Yeah, we got to be attentive to China, and we don't want to antagonize them needlessly. But if they have a sense of, we're being antagonistic to them, who cares? So they buy their soybeans from Brazil. Okay, you know what happened in 2018 when Trump put tariffs on China? China said, okay, we're not buying any more soybeans from the United States. We're buying them from Brazil. It was a huge disruption in the supply chain. It was one of the factors that fed into some of the inflation in 2022. A lot of it was government spending, but it wasn't that the tariffs were the sales taxes we described. It was that the supply chain was disrupted, which was also that had to do with COVID. But China shifted their soybean purchases to Brazil on long-term contracts because I mean the logistics behind that are the acreage, the port facilities, the transportation facilities. These people want 5-year contracts. They don't want a 6-month deal, etc. So what did the United States do? We sold our soybeans to the Netherlands. I mean, it's a big world. So yeah, we found another buyer. China found another seller, but we found another buyer. We're growing just as many soybeans, but we're selling them to Europe. And if China wants some, they can come and get it. My point is, a lot of these threats, there's a lot less there than meets the eye. And I'm not saying, by the way, when I talk about tariffs, I'm not saying global trade is going to go to zero, or it's the new Great Depression, or although that was titled one of my books, but it's not that there's no trade. Even if we have all this U.S. manufacturing, which I described, we're still going to need inputs from abroad, and these things can also be negotiated. Trump's kind of, acting with a pretty blunt instrument at the moment, and if no one wants to deal with him, it'll stay that way. But the door is open for talks, and certainly U.S.-Canadian car industry, they ought to figure out a way to solve that. But how do you solve it when Canada's been free riding for all these years? So I don't really. The thing is, Francis, you have to have the attitude you don't care. It's like China's miffed, too bad. That's your problem. Figure it out. Why doesn't China reorient its economy to consumption from investment, half of which is wasted, by the way? I spent a lot of time in China. I mean, I've been to these ghost cities. You go to one of them. It's I like to say I got mud on my boots, but I got mud on my Italian loafers. But I did go out to the construction sites, and and I had a couple Communist Party chaperones, and they were my hosts, so they said, look at this. We have a high-rise hotel. We have a country club. We have a conference center. We have apartment buildings. We have mixed-use office buildings, shops, and everything. There's an airport nearby. It's a highway exit, etc. I said, yeah, but it's all empty. I mean, everything you said was true. I saw it. I was there, and there was more going up, but it was all empty. Sometimes when you're, I'll just say, collecting information, you have to sort of have you operate under a story, so to speak. And my story was I was there as a potential investor, and they pictured me as a big tenant. Although they don't realize hedge funds don't have a lot of employees necessarily. But as I was going through all this, they were really putting on a hard sell. But I looked down the horizon, there were 2 more ghost cities on the horizon. You could see them in the distance. They were building a whole string of them. Technically, that's GDP. I mean, there's real steel, real glass, real copper, real construction, 20,000 jobs for 2 years. That's all real. But when you're done, if you apply generally accepted accounting principles, you would write it off. You'd say it's worth zero. I mean, Pricewaterhouse would make you write it down to zero. So my point being, the investment's real, but if you subtract the lost value, your GDP is grossly overstated. Even China having come down from 10% to 5%, which is about what they say, it's probably closer to 2.5 when you adjust for the kind of waste I'm talking about, and then maybe less than that. So China may already be in a recession. They lie about it, so we don't really know. But again, you have to have a little bit of an attitude of, who cares?